God allows things to happen to people for no reason of anything they have done personally. They haven't done anything. I mean, we've all done stuff that's wrong, but they did not deserve what they got. And they did not make a bad decision any worse than anybody else. And so, like, I can give you endless examples, like people losing children, people getting diseases and suffering painfully for nothing they have done. And these are Christians who continue to have faith in God. So what's going on here? Why would God allow something to happen to someone that is for no reason of their own? And this gets back to a philosopher, William Rowe. William Rowe is an atheist philosopher, and he cites two examples of bad evils, like just what appeared to us to be utterly pointless evils. One involves a little girl, and one involves a fawn badly burned in a forest fire. And in his mind, as an atheist, there is neither of these, the little fawn or that little 5-year-old girl, did anything to deserve what happened to them. And the reader would all agree. But Rowe does suggest that if this in fact prevents a greater evil, much larger in the future, or brings about a greater good, then God would be morally obligated to allow that 5-year-old girl to experience what she did, as well as the little fawn in the forest. So if God is perfectly good, then to bring about a greater good, he must allow, by his own nature of being perfectly good, because keep in mind, if he had prevented that instance of suffering, it actually brings about a greater evil in the future. So somebody might say, well, why doesn't he just intervene in the future too? Why doesn't he just keep intervening and not allow anybody to have harm? And a lot of philosophers have written on that. Peter van Inwagen, for example, is a well-known philosopher who's written on that. And he suggests there that, well, we would then enter into what he calls a massively imbalanced world where nothing bad ever happened, and you were not allowed to do anything ever bad. You were always prevented from doing it, or at least prevented, you might be able to do something, but God would intervene and make sure there was no harm done. And in that world, it would be kind of like Alice in Wonderland. It would be a world that was just bizarre, where you never learned moral responsibility because nothing bad ever happened for your actions. And in God's plan, he's more interested in how you're doing on the inside, as far as you're growing into a more mature person, spiritually mature, personally mature, than whether or not you suffer or not. Now, he grieves when we suffer, as a parent might grieve when their child has to, say, take a needle in the arm to be vaccinated against something. But in the long term, God knows this is for the best, not necessarily for that person. They won't see any reward for this in this life, but they will experience that there will be a much greater good in the future. But there's a worry with that. It reveals what we might call a harshly utilitarian view of God and the individual, that the individuals can suffer greatly for some greater good to the society. And this is a concern because it's still unjust for the individual. And there, William Rowe says that, well, if she experiences some great benefit in the afterlife, because in this life she certainly didn't experience it. In fact, she died during the course of the terrible event. Then it would still be justified. So God would have to make it up to her some way in the future for allowing an event that needed to be allowed in order to prevent much greater suffering down the road for many more people, but at the same compensate that little girl in the afterlife basically two things would have to happen. A, as far as her recollection, she would have no memory of that ever happening, so to haunt her. And B, the compensation would be so great that even if she was reminded of that, it would seem like nothing in comparison to the benefit she received in the afterlife. Of course, William Rowe is an atheist, so he doesn't believe there is any such compensation. So then he goes on to argue God does not exist.